Adobe will acquire rival design platform Figma.
Since 1982, Adobe has dominated the software market, responsible for such products like Illustrator, Photoshop, After Effects, and even inventing the PDF. But what if I told you that half of those products that I just listed were acquisitions? In fact, in its 40-year-plus existence, Adobe has acquired over 50 companies. Just recently, Adobe announced that they would spend $20 billion to acquire Figma, 4 times the price of their next highest purchase. And history tells us that Adobe will adopt Figma as one of its own, and Figma fans have nothing to worry about in regards to the product being shut down. Or do they? In this episode, we're going to look at 2 key acquisitions made by Adobe that differ wildly with the eventual fate of the product. From there, we can draw insight on what lies ahead for Figma, Adobe, and the greater SaaS world. I'm Ben Hillman, and this is Verticals. In 1987, Thomas Knoll was attending the University of Michigan when he decided to distract himself from his studies with a coding project that would display grayscale images on a black and white monitor. He called this program Display. Thomas's brother John worked for a little-known company known as Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM. John asked Thomas if he could help him program a computer to process image files digitally, and Display seemed like a perfect starting point. Thomas worked on Display, adding all sorts of capabilities, like color processing, as well as the ability for users to change features like color balance, hue, and saturation. Eventually, the brothers settled on a name that would stick until this day: Photoshop. Eventually, it caught the attention of the executives at Adobe. Adobe worked out an agreement with the Knoll brothers to distribute the product in exchange for royalties. Photoshop would function as a companion product for Adobe's Illustrator, which was a vector graphics editor released in 1987. And so, Photoshop version 1.0 shipped in February of 1990 at a list price of $895, exclusively for the Macintosh. Photoshop's dominance was massive. In 1995, Adobe bought out the Knoll brothers' royalty agreement for $34.5 million. Photoshop joined in-house created video editor Premiere and was later itself joined by further acquisitions of motion graphics editor After Effects and audio program Audition. Eventually, these products would become the foundation to Adobe's core SaaS offering, Adobe Creative Cloud. The Knoll brothers also benefited, in addition to their generous sum. They ended up working with Adobe for years after the acquisition, and in 2019, the two received a Scientific and Engineering Award at the Oscars. But perhaps best of all is whenever you open the Photoshop program, even to this day, you can still see the brothers' names. But not all of Adobe's acquisitions have ended up so rosy. In 1988, 2 corporations, Aldus and Altsys, reached a licensing agreement to release a vector graphics editor named FreeHand, and a graphics program, PhotoStyler. FreeHand and PhotoStyler competed with Adobe's Illustrator and Photoshop respectively. In 1994, Adobe Systems announced that they had an agreement with Aldus Corporation to merge in a $525 million deal. But this isn't our acquisition of focus. Altsys sued Aldus over a non-compete clause within the FreeHand licensing agreement. FreeHand users were assured by Altsys CEO and founder James Von Eyre that no one loves FreeHand more than we do. We will do whatever it takes to see it survive. And FreeHand's dedicated customer base had cause for concern, as the merger would result in Adobe killing the PhotoStyler product, ending competition with Photoshop. In October of 1994, the Federal Trade Commission ordered that Adobe divest FreeHand in order to prevent competition from ending. For a period of 10 years from the date on which this order becomes final, respondents shall not acquire any professional illustration software. Altsys retained the rights to FreeHand, but instead of keeping it in-house, decided to sell it to a different company, Macromedia. Over the next decade, Macromedia became Adobe's new foe. In 1997, James Von Eyre left Macromedia. This left the door open for something drastic to happen. On April 18th of 2005, Adobe announced that they would acquire Macromedia in a stock swap of $3.4 billion. They'd waited just over the 10-year limit imposed by the American government, and with FreeHand champion James Von Eyre no longer present, users were on edge. In 2006, the FreeHand community announced the FreeHand support page petition, and soon after in 2007, the FreeHand Must Not Die petition was also filed. Adobe assured users as late as June of 2006 that they would continue to support FreeHand and develop it based on customer needs. But less than a year later, in May of 2007, Adobe announced the end of FreeHand. FreeHand users were incensed. In 2011, the Free Macromedia Freehand organization filed a civil antitrust complaint against Adobe systems, but it was too late. Freehand was finished. As mentioned, Adobe has had dozens of acquisitions over the years, consistently topping billions of dollars. Photoshop and Freehand were just two extreme examples of what Adobe is capable of. So now, let's take a look at Figma. In 2012, Dylan Field dropped out of Brown University and took $100,000 as a Thiel Fellow to start his own business. He was joined by fellow computer science student Evan Wallace. Convinced that design is collaborative by nature, the two focused primarily on moving the process to the cloud and allowing maximum flexibility for teams to collaborate. After launching in December of 2015, Field asserted in a TechCrunch interview that his big competitor doesn't understand collaboration, and that the Adobe Creative Cloud is really cloud in name only. Over the years, and especially after the 2013 depreciation of Adobe Fireworks, more and more UX designers felt that the Creative Cloud did not match market expectations. While Photoshop and Illustrator are powerful programs in their own right, they lack the in-browser functionality of Figma. Adobe tried to compete with their own product, Adobe XD, that they launched in 2016. But whether through a lack of focus or not enough dedicated resources, they just couldn't compete. By 2021, Figma was well and truly the king of the web-based design world, and by some distance. Among over 3,000 individuals surveyed by UX Tools in 2021, Figma was the preferred UI design tool at 77%, up from just 11% in 2017, compared to Adobe XD, which has never cracked 25%. In June of 2021, Figma had a valuation of $10 billion, quintupling its price tag from the previous year. But then, a few months later, Adobe proposed a deal to purchase Figma at twice the price in what is one of the biggest software deals in history. Now that we're caught up to today, what does this mean for Figma fans and the SaaS world at large? With our two previous examples in Photoshop and Freehand, we see contrasting stories. With Photoshop, Adobe incorporated it into their core offering and treated it as one of their own. I bet a few of you were even surprised to hear that Photoshop was an acquisition in the first place. Additionally, there wasn't much competition at the time. The folks at Adobe simply realized the potential for the software and capitalized on it. With Freehand, we see a multi-decade battle of Adobe zeroing in on its competition and tactically dismantling it in favor of its own, even with a promise to keep it going. And it wasn't the only time that Adobe has done this. Adobe realized the potential with Figma, just like all of the acquisitions that they made before. And they have a consistent track record of hitting on heavy bets as to where software and SaaS is going, even if they weren't the ones to make the product themselves. Many designers worry that Adobe won't let Figma flourish, as was the case with Freehand. In particular, there are concerns that Adobe's acquisition could result in Figma slowly shutting down its free membership, alongside losing the freedom to develop independently from Adobe. Dylan Field appears to be aware of this, and it seems that he's trying to ease concerns. In an interview with The Verge, he assured Figma users that he was going nowhere, and that Figma was poised for even more growth inside Adobe. Only time will tell if Figma will be a Photoshop or a Freehand. In general, there's divided opinion about whether this multi-billion acquisition is good for the SaaS industry. Lack of competition means Adobe can get away with a subpar product. Figma will now have to succeed in concert with Adobe, not in spite of Adobe. Hopefully, Dylan Field sticks around in order to avoid a similar situation with Freehand and James Von Eyre. Further, experts warn that the current generation of SaaS startups will never be able to break the hold that entrenched platform companies have over the enterprise software market, especially if they keep entering into mergers and acquisitions with the same legacy companies. Will there be a new Adobe, Google, or Salesforce, or are all SaaS companies destined to be acquired by those who came before? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. From Paddle, I'm Ben Hillman, and I'll see you next time.